You know what perimenopause isn't? An ashwagandha deficiency.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that one. Yeah. Yeah, like these are all supplements. They're supplemental. You got to get the basic fundamentals correct first. So that means exercise, diet, resistance training, sleeping,
Alcohol.
optimizing avoiding alcohol and drugs, and then optimizing your hormones, right? In the way that they're intended to be and the way that your body needs them to function. And then you can look at all the supplemental stuff, right? Like data, no data, right? Most things have no data, some have some data. But ultimately, like we got to get the foundation right. Like don't stop taking indigo, whatever you're doing. Stop that and work. Make sure you're optimized. Yeah, optimize everything else first.
Because I'm not black and white supplements, no supplements. And they'll be like, what supplements do you like? And I'm like, dude, the basics. Effing caffeine. Caffeine's a supplement. I use it heavily, right? Like
Yep.
protein powder. Heavily supplement that. Creatine's got fantastic data for bone and brain, not just muscles. Fiber, because we don't all put it in. Vitamin D. Oh my God, the data on vitamin D. It's insane that we don't screen for vitamin D. So it's like there are some bread, I would call them kind of the bread and butter supplements. Like they're still in this category of like they don't require a prescription, but like there's pretty solid data. But people don't think of caffeine and protein powder as a supplement, right? It's like,
and if you're not eating enough fish, like omega 3.
Yeah, totally. So, but anything that's proprietary, anything that's like heavily marketed by perhaps a famous person, like anything that's like our special like our special
proprietary
bells
blend
and whistles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's kind of a buyer beware. And I mean, here's the other fascinating thing about the placebo effect is like supplements work because of the placebo effect, but then they will stop working. So like, that's why you're like, I worked for my friend and it worked for me. It's like, yeah, just give it some time. it'll wear off if it doesn't actually work.
So now that people understand sort of perimenopause, what that feels like for the woman, what can they do? Like they see their partner like one day feeling normal, the next day feeling crazy, the next day feeling really down and depressed or sleep deprived or not sleeping well. What can they do?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do is put the filter on the face that says, "Am I addressing this with love? Am I addressing this with love and compassion?" And if you put that filter on the face and the heart, it's going to go a lot better than like, "What's wrong with you? What's the problem with you? Why are you so like pointing out all the negatives of like, it's not going to be a great party if that's how you enter with." So it's like, what would love do? Be like, "Hey, it seems like lately things have been really overwhelming. At some point, could we talk about that? We don't even need to talk about that right now. Just again, at some point, could we talk about that?" Right? It might just kind of set a little seed in there of like, okay, well, they're noticing something, but like they weren't mean to me. They were open to talking about it later when I actually want to talk about it. Right. And so it's like lead with love. You don't need to solve everything right away, but acknowledge that it's real. The fact that we call these sex hormones is like one of the most devastating things we did to this because they were discovered in testicles and ovaries. But like these are legitimate brain neurochemicals. They affect mood, they affect emotion, they affect your exhaustion level and your energy, cognition. So it's like it's real. It's not this whole like it's in her head of like, well, yeah, kind of, because that's where brains are. But it doesn't mean, I think people say that as in like they're making it up or it's not real. Of like it's very real, and yes, it is in her head. I was gonna say like a couple of years ago, I told my husband, I'm like, listen, if you start noticing any of these things, I want you to let me know because I might not see it when it's happening to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would add is I'm worried about you. I love you. Like add those couple sentences. I think that's always helpful. And two, I would just say that like a lot of times I hear this, well, my mom never complained about menopause. I never heard my mom complain. And that generation is so different. My mom had surgical menopause and she went through horrible hot flashes and right in front of my eyes, like miserable, exhaustion because she'd wake up with hot flashes and obviously hormonal changes. Yeah, she didn't complain very much, but it was a different generation.
What's the point of complaining? Who's going to help you?
There was nothing to do.
There was nothing to do. And so that's why I always say is like, what was the point of complaining? And what are you making complaining mean? that she wasn't suffering because she didn't complain, right? Like the truth of it is right under the surface when you start asking the questions. I remember my mom couldn't sleep at all. She was up at 4 a.m, going to bed, like decades of not sleep. I still don't think she sleeps very well. But it's like, dude, sleep is so number one, longevity. Like it's always funny, like we have to say other reasons for things besides just living longer. Like that's not enough, right?
Yeah.
But it's like longevity, mood, sex drive. There's no sex drive when you're
Living
exhausted.
longer and living better. That's it. Living longer, living better. That's really what it is.
Well, I always in my talks, and this is to all genders, but I think this explains it to men, is like if there was a drug, which again, should we even call these things drugs if they're what our body naturally makes? I don't have a better word for it at this time. But if there was a drug that men could take between the ages of 50 and 60, and if they took that drug, they would live on average about 3 years longer. Do you think every man would be on that drug? And most people are like, yeah, I think most men would be on that drug. Okay, well, that drug's called estrogen for women. We have the data. There's multiple studies on longevity. There's an amazing Medicare data analysis. I think it came out last year, basically looking at 65-year-olds. So when you enrolled in Medicare, if you were on hormones or if you weren't on hormones, most of those people, they're started like at 50, right? So they've been on it for a while. And they looked at the comorbidities that they had compared to their compatriots who weren't on hormones. And it's like, dude, you know what group you want to be in? Because people are like, I don't want to take a drug or a medicine. And it's like, taking this actually makes you take less other drugs.
Less antidepressants, less other, maybe less blood pressure medications, less cholesterol medications, like a lot of changes. And the same thing goes for testosterone, right? If you are low, and it's a little bit different because not all men get low testosterone, right? Not all men have symptoms because they don't have a menopause, right? They don't have a menopause, but they similarly have longevity benefits. And the data is so clear, right? Improves cognition, improves mood, improves sexual health, improves libido, improves, what am I missing? Muscle
diabetes,
health, right? So
risk of diabetes,
cholesterol, longevity,
desire
quality of life.
and erections.
Yes, all those things. And so you are, we see it on men. The data's, and we were talking about this before we started, the data is not there for women because the studies are just, number one, not funded as well. And there's just not as many people invested in doing women's health research as there are in men's health. Mm-hmm. And I think hopefully that will change and we'll have better, stronger data, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you and I are part of with this movement is we're actually making health disparities worse, because the educated women who have access are going to get on the hormones, and 10 years are going to go by. And again, we'll repeat the damn Medicare study. And it's like the women who are, because currently right now, how it stands is you have to advocate, you have to self-educate, you have to understand it, because and what I hear probably more than most other things on my social media is, because of you, I was able to advocate and I got my vaginal estrogen, I got my patch, I asked for testosterone, blah, blah, blah. It's like, we're empowering people to advocate for their health. And that's incredibly powerful. So, but we're creating that disparity because not everybody can do that or will do that or has access to do that unless medicine changes. And I mean, we're not even screening men for low testosterone. I don't think as we have an FDA approved, estrogen's FDA approved for the prevention of osteoporosis. 1 in 2 women will break a bone in their life. We have more admissions in the hospital every year for hip fracture than for heart attack and stroke combined. One could argue this is a big enough deal with enough of the population that you could just start taking estrogen for primary prevention of osteoporosis. I don't think it'll happen. It's a big bar to put a culture or a society on a medication. I don't think it's going to happen.
It's not going to happen. And I think we just do what we can, and I think ultimately we got to share the data. We got to share it widely, the data that we have that is clear, right? It helps with hot flashes, which are, the worse your hot flashes are, the worse the effects on your entire body are, right? So the worse your hot flashes are, likely the worse effects are on your entire body, and it prevents osteoporosis, right? Those are 2 big reasons that can catch a lot of people, right? That can catch the majority of the population.
Well, yeah, 80% have vasomotor symptoms. So hot flashes, night sweats, blah, blah. If you want to take the low end of that data, it's 60% of people. So it's like, we have 5% of women in America on prescription hormones right now, probably higher hormones in general because so many compound it because they're not getting it from the traditional medical system. So maybe 8% in the 1990s. This is what's so insane about it too, is in the 1990s, about 40% of women were on hormones, depending upon what data you want to look at. So it's like, we're not even trying to like do something new. We're just trying to get back to the 1990s when more people were on hormones.
And there's benefit to starting it earlier, right? Because you don't want to have if you've already developed some cardiovascular risk factors, that's where we started having the discussion about whether this is risky or not. So the healthier you are, the better time it is to start. And so same thing goes for if you have a partner who's generally healthy, starting to notice these symptoms, talk to them. Again, loving kindness, have a conversation and say, I'll go with you. I'll come with you to the doctor. Like, let's go together. Let's talk about it. And if you don't like that doctor and you're fortunate enough to have the means, find another doctor, right? No doctor should ever get mad at you for getting a second opinion. And
in Canada, you can't change your primary care doctor.
I believe that. I
was podcasting with a Canadian the other week, and I was like, yeah, you can get a second opinion. And she's like, not in Canada. And I'm like, oh, that's more challenging, because then you're really hamstrung to what the knowledge of that one person has for your health, which seems really rough.
Yeah, that's really tough.
I think, people often ask me, they're like, do you just want everybody to be on hormones? And I'm like, no, truthfully, I don't care what you do with your body. Like, I really don't care, but I do care greatly that you make that decision based upon education and knowledge, not fear and misinformation. And I've got to tell you, the amount of talks I've done with women, you give them that information and the knowledge of what's actually happening to your body, how safe these things are and the benefits of it. They're smart. Most of them want to then be like, they just need the info. But I'm not here to put like the people who don't want to be on hormones, don't go on hormones. I don't care. I care that you have knowledge.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about how female arousal works, because I think a lot of times, obviously, we know that lubrication declines with menopause, and a lot of men just think she's lubricated, she's aroused, that's it, good to go. So let's just talk about like what that means for the partner who wants to make sure their partner is really turned on when they're approaching them.
Some people think this is sexy, and some people think this is not sexy, but you can ask them. But in asking them, you have to know that you're going to get the truth back. And I would argue many women don't feel comfortable being truthful. What they say is to please their partner. So we've got several issues there. They don't ask, and then they don't tell the truth when they're asked, right? So there's two complexities to that. But that in an ideal situation, that's going to be the straightest road to the town. Arousal comes in two forms: brain arousal and pelvic arousal. So your brain can be willing, yeah, I want to do this. And your pelvis can be like, no, the blood flow is a challenge. It's kind of like, it's very similar to erections, because that's just like a easier in your face mechanism to see. Is like, the guy can want to have sex. He can have a good libido. He can be in the moment, but the penis is just not cooperating. At the same time, penis can be hard, and he's like, now is not a good time to use this thing, right? So the brain's not aroused. So we got brain and we've got pelvis. In an ideal world, they're coordinated, but we know that they can often be discoordinated for various reasons. Going straight, I think this whole myth of like, you want sex now? Like, that women are just light switches and like that's just how it works, is like, give her some time to get in the mood, to downshift, like parasympathetic nervous system of like acceptance, relaxation, safety. We do not talk about safety enough in good sex. Like safety. If you don't have safety, and I don't mean like the door's unlocked and somebody's going to bust in, like that's kind of like the big, but it's like, do I feel comfortable telling you the truth when you ask me if I'm aroused? Do I feel comfortable saying, you know what, I don't think an orgasm is going to happen for me tonight? Do I feel comfortable being like, what would really help right now? A vibrator. Do I feel safe to communicate the truth to you? Is huge. Do I feel safe being vulnerable? Like, your face makes a super funny face when you have an orgasm. Like, are you safe in sharing that with somebody? Right. So I'm like, safety is so big, and we don't talk about safety enough in the world of good adult sex ed.
Yeah, I often say you can't have good sex unless you're vulnerable. You can't. You just can't. You need to allow yourself to be vulnerable, because sex is a vulnerable act.
It is vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I think we've done a big discredit, not we, like not us personally, but the whole like hookup culture of like go get wasted and go hook up with a stranger. So effing unsafe. It was so unsafe. And we have data to support that. Like the assaults that happen, let alone if you just look at orgasm, a woman orgasms about 7% of the time in hookup culture to a man's 95% of the time. Right? So we already know she's not safe in this scenario. And the fact that we've normalized that behavior for our young women and men is absolutely atrocious.
I agree. I think that, yeah, I think being able to choose who you have sex with and when you have sex with them is empowering, but I don't think that there is value in necessarily hooking up with the first person you see, right? Because you want to. Like, I think there needs to be a little thought behind that and safety and feeling trust and comfort, because otherwise it's not going to be good. So what's the point?
What's that exactly? I mean, that's to me, I'm like, just give people the data. And if you're like, hey, girlfriends, you're super more likely to be assaulted in this drunk sex scenario, super more likely to catch an infection because it's not protected, super more likely to never have an effing orgasm. Like, what are you playing this game for? This is a stupid game at this point. It is not benefiting you.
And I think also, we've talked about this before, but like arousal takes time, as you mentioned, but because sometimes desire comes after arousal for women, right? So
Mhm.
if you put energy into your partner, so you start flirting with them, you start touching them, you start caressing them, and don't start with the invitation to have sex, but hey, can I just like be with you? I just want to hold you. I just want to like make you feel loved, or I want to, this feels nice. Does this feel nice for you? Desire can come after, right? And that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean that it's just being open and receptive to a partner who loves you. And then like allowing desire to come and having good sex after that.
Yeah, totally. It's a pro move. And again, it's not how because nobody's taught about how to have good adult sex, but it's like the desire piece. So many people think desires, I love the word appetitive, but appetite driven. So if you don't eat, you're more hungry. If you don't drink, you're more thirsty. If you don't sleep, you're more sleepy. Freud said sex was appetitive. That's what libido is. It's a drive. And so we told that explicitly or not, women are like, I'm not sitting around desiring sex. So like, I guess I don't like sex. I guess I won't have sex then, because they don't understand that desire isn't appetitive for many people, especially in long-term relationships, especially when you are freaking this high-powered, I got a job, I got kids, I got a household, I got a marriage, I got the things, I've got aging parents, right? Like, you're not going to have an appetitive drive. Like, let's just own it. Some people do. There's nothing wrong with them, but many people don't. But if you're not told that, hey, that's normal and you can still have an amazing sex life with it, they don't know.
If you like that clip, make sure to check out the full episode right here.